In the workplace, what you communicate with your employee, your superior, or your subordinate could violate a contract. The relationship between employee and employer, or superior and subordinate, is far more complex than what is written in an employment contract. More often than not, there is a very important contract that is being violated by both parties, and this is called psychological contract. Employee and employer, subordinate and superior, have a set of unwritten expectations that they implicitly consider to be part of the working deal, and it is distinct from the formal employment contract. For example, an employee would be loyal, responsible, and competent. In return, that employee would expect appreciation, support, and job security. Thus, based on personal belief or understanding, all are subject to perception unless clarified. Psychological contract is implicit, unwritten, and not legally binding, while employment contract is explicitly written and legally binding. The very reason that it becomes complex is that these expectations are the deal in the mind, a person's beliefs or interpretation of what they owe an employer and what they can expect in return from an employer over time. Since it is personal understanding, it could be based on individual schema, which leads to different interpretation of expectations. Consequently, it presents complexity in the workplace relationship. An employee could interpret a commitment or obligation on the part of the employer if they do things in return. If this would be violated, conflicts would arise between the employee and employer, whether there will be a psychological contract breach and/or psychological contract violation. Perceived breaches of the psychological contract can severely damage the relationship between employer and employee, or superior and subordinate. Fairness is a significant part of the psychological contract, bound up in equity theory. Employees need to perceive that they are being treated fairly to sustain a healthy psychological contract. The breach or violation leads to different workplace predicament. Based on different studies, the effects are physical fatigue, headache, insomnia, depression, anxiety, and overall job burnout. The psychological contract develops and evolves constantly based on communication or lack thereof between the employee and the employer. Psychological contract could be dynamic and shifting. For example, a new employee often has high expectation of the unwritten deal. Over time, when the so-called honeymoon period is over, the employee would realize that the unwritten deal is unsatisfied or being violated. This is either negotiated to meet the psychological contract, or employees just remain silent and frustrated. This is a complex reason on how psychological contract affects behavior. This violation results to all negative counterparts of work engagement and job satisfaction. This could lead to either gain or the loss of the employer or superior. Usually, employee would adjust the psychological contract to meet the interpreted observation of what is happening in the workplace, so the exchange feels more equal between the employee and employer or superior and subordinate. The change of behavior from positive to negative is a consequence of psychological contract breach rather than the violation of the legal employment contract. This implies how important psychological contract is because it is an insightful way in understanding the effects of what we communicate in the workplace. So how do we address psychological contract breach or violation? Write your answers or comment down below. Like, share, and subscribe for more videos on organizational communication or communication in the workplace.